Everyone, I'm Fiona Bradley, I'm the director of the Fruitmarket, and it's very much my pleasure to welcome those of you in the room to the Fruitmarket and those of you online to the Fruitmarket, and also Briony in the room and Leonor online. I have to say, when we set this up, we didn't expect that we would be bringing Leonor in online as well as other audience, but Leonor is battling through COVID and is joining us from Berlin, and we're very, very pleased that you could do so. Leonor, thank you. The way we're set up is ideally we can see Leonor here, except we can't, so I might ask Elizabeth to go and fiddle with it. So I'll just talk a little bit while we get the technology sorted about the way the event's going to go with the technology. We are here, as I know that you know, to launch this incredibly special book. Those of you who've been following the Fruitmarket for a long time know that publishing is really important to what we do. We don't operate in one of the world's centres for the visual arts. We run an extraordinary, I think, exhibition programme, and we're incredibly grateful that artists of the calibre of Leonor Antunes agree to be part of our programme. Making books is something, in a small way, that we can do to give back to the artists who trust us with their work. It's something that we feel offers them another space, a second space to work in alongside our exhibitions. We are one of the only galleries, I think, in the history of the world that has a talented graphic designer as its deputy director in Elizabeth McLean, who is also currently running around trying to sort out the computer. So I'm going to big you up while I can't see you, but making the books is a really important part of what we do, and there's a backwards and forwards between the exhibition programme and the book publishing programme all the time. Our exhibitions and our publications are made at the same time. I should say never quite as much at the same time as this one. And that is thanks to Briony Fer, the extraordinary writer and curator Briony Fer, who's worked with us before. I'm sitting here looking at our programme. We first worked with Briony on a show with Eva Hesse, and then again with Gabriela Roscoe, and then with Leonor. When I first talked to you, Leonor, about making a show with us, I sort of said maybe it would be a good chance for you to continue to be in conversation with Briony. Briony had written on Leonor's work before, and I knew that hadn't curated a show but had contributed texts to publication. So Leonor said, well, you know, it would be, I think you said to me, it would be lovely to make a show here, and perhaps I could continue the conversation with Briony, and Briony could curate the show. And what we managed to do was continue that conversation all the way through the selection of the show, into the installation of the show. And I really don't think I have ever seen a project where Leonor was in the gallery installing the show and Briony was up in my office putting the finishing touches to the book, to the text for the book. So Briony, you would come down, check something, go, oh, I can write about that, go back upstairs, and so the book came into being. Elizabeth has never been matched before for speed by a writer. Elizabeth is a very fast designer, but I don't think she's ever been matched before. So it was really an extraordinary project. And it has this, I think, incredibly visual indication of the extraordinariness of it, that we did 2 covers because we thought both colours were great and we couldn't really decide, and we thought that maybe we make a virtue of the flexibility of how we work and do one of each. And so the cover, only I think if you work in this way, if you work in this very immediate way, can you do that. So the book is the product of a conversation between Elizabeth and Briony and Leonor and the photographer Nick Ash. It's really a celebration of their joint thinking, and for me a celebration of everything on the scale we are and the priorities we have that the Fruitmarket can do. So I'm really, really proud to launch this book tonight. I'm just going to thank a few people before we really get stuck in. We were really pleased that Longrow Capital supported this exhibition, and I know, Leonor, you would join me in thanking your galleries, Kuriman Zuto, Marion Goodman Gallery, Louisa Strina, Takeishi, and Air de Paris, who all supported the exhibition and the catalogue. So thank you very much to them. We wouldn't have been able to do any of it, really, without them. I wish money wasn't important, but it kind of is, and all the other kinds of support that these people give us. So, just in case you wonder why we're talking to this computer, Leonor's on here for us, because otherwise we're going to get terribly crick necks looking at that. So I hope that works, and that the intimacy of this conversation works online and in the room. We're going to talk, well, Briony and Leonor, really, I'm going to chip in, are going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then there'll be a chance for a Q&A, both in the room and online. Ian Morrison is staffing the online question, so if you have a question online, do please put it in the chat, I think, or the Q&A or anywhere. and Ian will pick it up. But and then afterwards, at the end of all that, there will be a chance for those of you in the room to buy the book. We had hoped that Leonor, you would be here to sign the book, but Briony's here, so Briony can sign the book, and possibly Elizabeth also. It is available also through a link online, my sales pitch, the special price, this one night only, £28, it's £35 otherwise in the wider world, so do buy it tonight if you think you're likely to buy it. I think that's the end of my sales pitching, and I can focus now on this extraordinary show and this extraordinary book and these extraordinary two people. I stress a lot how lucky we are in Scotland to be able to attract artists of the calibre of Leonor Antunes, writers and curators of the calibre of Briony Fer. We have this show, Leonor, it's such a shame you can't be here. I hate COVID for doing this to us because the show has been so popular. Our audience have loved it. It's really seen us through the summer in the most beautiful way. People have engaged with this show on a level of craft, on a level of materiality, on a level of, I'm not quite sure I know what this is, but I'm going to get into it and find out. It's really been a wonderful voyage of discovery for many of our audiences. So thank you very much for that. Thank you both very much for that. Briony, you've got a plan. I'm going to pass over to you.
Kind of plan. Kind of plan.
Let's have a conversation.
I think the first thing, thank you, Fiona, but I think the first thing, and I'm sure Leonor wants to say something about this as well, but I think we just both, Leonor and I both, want to thank you and everybody here for allowing us to do this, for letting it be possible, because it just isn't possible in any other place, I think. And it always is a context here that you make it possible for us to do, people can have their views about what it is, but from my point of view, and I feel we really shared this, it allowed us to do our best work. It allowed us to be free in a way that is simply not possible. And I'd curated 3 exhibitions last year.
I know.
And I can tell you, and Daphne, who was working with me at UCL, it's very nice to see her. No, I was a crazy person as I was actually writing the text, but also as we were. But it was so liberating to be able to work in this whatever you do here, where you say yes rather than no. It's very, very rare. Leonor, I think we
absolutely agree with you. I think, Fruitmarket is really, the people that work in the institution, and Fiona, I really admire the work you do there and all the stuff. And Elizabeth, she made an incredible, incredible book. We did it, as you said, we did it on site. We built it together, through conversation, sitting upstairs and drinking tea, and then me installing my work, and the amazing capacities that Briony has in writing, and being able to write anywhere. She could write in the cafe, which is crowded. She could go upstairs, coming downstairs with a book, taking notes of seeing us working. It was really, really special, and it's really a place for the artists. I really felt that, it's really a place where we can exist and we can work so good together, so really, I really appreciate it. It's not like the Fruitmarket that is proud of hosting me. I'm really super proud of having my work in that place, really.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
See, COVID, it still exists, it's still here, and this time really got me in. So sorry for this as well.
But I think we also wanted to actually begin with the thing that is the book, because obviously the life of an exhibition is quite a long life, in spite of the rapidity of a little bit of the touching up of the writing at the end, but it's a long thought process, and in this case a kind of thought experiment in a way, from the conception of it to thinking it through, to it being, the wonderful period of installation, to the life of the exhibition and the response of people, the exhibition has lived. And then this book, which is really very beautifully made by Elizabeth, and it did feel the whole project felt like we were making not just one thing, but several things. And I think the book was certainly very important to you, wasn't it, Leonor? And now we have this book with many installation photographs of this exhibition that's so distinctive, with photographs by Nick Ash, which actually does show some of that extreme materiality that is often very difficult to photograph in your work, I think, Leonor. So I wondered whether we could just start with this object that is the book, and the kind of space between the book and the exhibition, because that's really been a vital thread, I think, for us, hasn't it, throughout?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, I just wanted to, I think, refer to like very specific things about like why we chose these colors on the cover. For example, trying to match it with some of the weaving pieces that exist on the let's say, the ground floor entrance gallery. And as you said, we were trying to figure out why should we use this color instead of that. And then we had this idea of using the inside of the cover as the outside of the cover. So this idea of bringing the outside to the inside and the inside to the outside, and like using the embossing in the cover, which is referring to the pattern of the detail of the pattern of the floor. I think it was a very interesting idea. And Briony was saying the other day that, you know, like the book, I mean, for me it's the same. The book it exists with these two versions of colors, but now we can't see it separately. We see it together. And as me, I see it as a kind of a doppelganger on the other side, or existing as a doppelganger. But so I think the book for me is very special because, I mean, there's a lot of dedication on it. I really appreciate again the work that Elizabeth has done so closely with us, working in this project together, because it means that it is a joint adventure. It's not, and it's a person that works in the institution, and we all know, and is very present, but at the same time has this kind of relevance in making the publications, which is normally museums or institutions hire designers who work outside the institution, which is a very different thing because they are not even so present in the work. And she was really present since the beginning with our conversations. So in a way, this makes it even more special. And for me, this idea of like, I don't normally work this way. I normally tend to do new work for exhibitions. And this has been a very special exhibition in that sense. I mean, I was struggling in the beginning, and then Briony really helped me a lot, also referring to the history of the institution, having like the history of the past exhibitions that have taken place, and that it kind of also relates with a lot of things that I've been researching. And I thought like bringing this kind of groups together in the same kind of building, because it's 3 separate rooms, and the constellation of how things happen there was made the work in a way very particular to me, because I also like to get surprised. And with my own work, I don't like to install things in the same way. I mean, I never do that, but I think this, and going back to the idea of the cover, thinking about this idea of the outside and the inside of the 2 colors that exist in the publication, and then also thinking of what happens in the exhibition is a lot to do with this idea of like you're outside and you're inside the work. You're engaged with it, you get inside the structures, which happen to be in the main gallery, which is this constellation of myriad of different sculptures that are hanging in these structures. And sometimes you feel, I think as an audience, you feel quite, I mean, I still have my COVID brain, so I'm not so clear today. But this notion of being outside of the sculpture, but also being part of it at the same time. and trying to arrange this series of, I'm going a little bit out of the subject now, but trying to arrange these 3 rooms in very different ways and really working with the space. It's what it made the work so special, at least for me, even though I was showing existing works. I think the constellation of how these things inhabit space are very, very different.
I mean, we had a lot of conversations, didn't we, Leonor, about what it might mean to bring into the exhibition earlier work that you've done, many of which I'd seen in other contexts, in different arrangements, and what that would mean to make an exhibition like that that wasn't a retrospective. And we were very clear, you were very clear, you know, this isn't a retrospective in any way, you know, it's not at all comprehensive, but it was a selection of work that could be brought into a new arrangement that was sort of sensitive to this context in certain way. You obviously did also make new work for this particular site and for this exhibition, most obviously the floor works, but also, you know, that it is so different in a way, seeing even the work that I've seen in other locations, when it's shown in this arrangement according to the rules that you set yourself. Of course, it feels like a very different work. And particularly in this downstairs gallery, this series of works where you create a structure of display for these hanging pieces. So it almost sets up the kind of conditions of display that are always contingent upon the environment that they're in, and the works that are hung within it are, you know, they're not independent, but they could be substituted, and, you know, this mobility within the works. So I think I wondered how you felt about that when you now have seen the exhibition and seen the book, and how your own reflections on what it feels like to have shown some of these pieces that obviously you have, you know, some in Sao Paulo or in Mexico, you know, these works are extremely mobile, but they're not simply just traveling the world in what I would think of as a kind of conventional art world way. They're being very precisely placed and almost represented, and their meanings potentially change. But I just wondered if you could say something about, obviously not today, now. I felt this very strongly today when I came in, but, you know, you spent a long time installing the show, and then what it felt like to actually, as the artist, to see what you had done.
I think it's interesting what you say, but for me, was very interesting. Like each room, I would say it's a different thing, and it's a different. For me, it was a very different way of hanging and installing my work. So, like I would say, for example, the main gallery, I always imagine it because it's. I mean, for me, it's. I always tend to think, and this is also, which is interesting for me to have the show here, was also, I kind of lost my comfort zone, because I'm used to be in total control of what I'm doing. And in this case, I was not in total control of what I'm doing, because the space has its particularities, and which is, and is also contingencies. So for me, it was also, how can I install the work, which is kind of massive, but at the same not, but in such a contiguous space, which you can not even approach it in a single gaze, because you see it from the street and you see it. I mean, this is what I was interested, that people, like the audience, or the audience that walks in the street can also, it's a lot about this transparency, and that they can gaze it from the outside, what happens inside, not completely, but this is also interesting, like a zoom out of what exists inside. So I was interested in that, like what you could see it from the outside. And once you come in, it was a lot about like where we could hang things. We could not stretch the bamboo poles everywhere because we were limited by the ceiling conditions, and because there's a lot of tubes and light features and pipes that run through.
We need heating in Scotland. That's what's in our ceiling. Yeah. You did very well to navigate it, but yes.
But for me, it was interesting because otherwise I will be, I would have to interpret it, which I don't like to do. And so for me, it was giving me like a lot about restrictions of what I could do. And so I could only place it there. There was no other chance of going anywhere else. And because it's a constellation of works, so one has, I don't know, 6 poles, the other one 8 poles. So they are kind of groups of sculptures. They could exist independently, but in itself, like the myriad of this construction of things exist in itself. So I cannot really separate them from what they are. Because they also tell a story within itself, which is, I'm not going to go through there because it's very boring for the audience, I think. But so
really beautifully, the two of you, you talked about it being like a library, that work. That's how you, when you first started talking about it to us, it was this work is a library of your work and of techniques and of, I love that idea that it's, and because a library, then you going in and you can go in as deep as you like, or you can look on the outside, or you can open all the books. I think it still works. I don't know what you think, Briony, today, but it still works for me as a metaphor of that space.
But also of the different techniques, the different possibles. I always felt it feels so much about making, that these are different possible ways of weaving or making a lattice, or different kind of, often the weaving structure I think is incredibly strong, but how many myriad ways are there to weave something? Both literally, but also kind of like weaving. So it becomes almost a kind of an array of possibles, I feel, which is also library-like, isn't it? This idea of not a total universe of knowledge, but something more about makeability, perhaps. That. And it smells, doesn't it? It has a scent. I'm sure everybody, and the floor is soft. It's very, very physical. If it's a library, it's not a sort of very cerebral library, I feel. It's a very very sensual, very material kind of library of almost different kind of sensations that the body might have.
There's a thing you won't know, either of you, probably, because you haven't been here when the exhibition has been so open to the public, but pretty much every time when I walk past the exhibition, the artists and young people who work as our information assistants are usually down on the floor with a box of materials with a member of the public. I'm looking at one of our information assistants now who's smiling at me, scrabbling around with people who want to exactly that, enjoy the softness of the floor and the feel of the silk straw and the various different materials. And it's really interesting to me how bodily that response is, that people really want to get in there and feel the works. That we're doing a very good job and not letting people get in there and feel the works. But it's interesting that people do want to have that interaction, exactly that, with the material nature of it.
But I think it's also interesting that you don't really, as a spectator, you don't really know where to start to look at, because you are immediately when you enter, you are immersed in this thing that is happening there. But at the same time, you don't know where you are going to look from, because there's really no point of visibility of maybe you go to the other side of the little room and you look it from, the side of that whole thing constructing. So I think it's also the first time for me that I experienced that you enter and you're immediately in it. You don't have a space to go back and look at it because there's just no space and no way of looking at it. But the beginning of this project really has me thinking about, like, as you said, the idea of libraries and the constellation of different people that have migrated and have studied in Bauhaus or have migrated to the US and Mexico due to the Second World War. So I was interested in that history, but I was also interested in the history of shelving systems and appropriating mechanisms of domestic interiors. And I started to look at Charlotte Perriand's works that she did in Japan. And basically, when she came back from Japan and she was invited to collaborate in a gallery in Paris, she designed this shelving system for the shop, which was a design gallery. And she did these bamboo poles and created these wood shelves. So I started thinking of these bamboos that create like a kind of a forest where the bamboos itself are for me already sculptures in itself. Like they are as important as the woven pieces. And as Briony was saying, everything is woven there, like from the even like this kind of pillows which are sewn, or you have like the woven works made in looms with silk, or the needle work which is going up the thread and down the thread, creating this kind of screens, which create this kind of transparency in the room. And also the connecting tubes, which are knotted, but again, it's all about these lines and constructions of lines in space.
Do you see the installation in the warehouse has some aspects in common in a way? I mean, there's a lot of suspended works, there's a lot of, you know, knotting and threading and even weaving of some of the materials coming from in this much larger but also very immersive space, a darker space in the warehouse. And I wondered if you say that you treated every space differently, because every space here is different, how you approach that, if you could say a little bit more about how you approached the warehouse, but also how you felt about it when you'd kind of done it, if the artist is the kind of first spectator of your own work, you know, if you can reflect on how you felt about that space by the end of it.
I think the way we install it was really about like working in each space individually, and meaning like we would finish one room, we would start another, and then we'll finish the third one. And the warehouse was the most challenging space for me in that sense, because also the one I liked the most, to be honest, because it's so rough and it's not a proper white cube, and that's what I really like. And the other thing was the moment we opened the shades on the top, it really changed. And I think this was the moment when I started really engaging with the space, the moment when the light comes in, because I love the use of natural light, because it changes the room constantly throughout the day. And it's for me, it's the most interesting way of looking at work, with natural light or the lack of it when it fades in. But I think the warehouse was really trying to figure out like this constellation of works, which are the hanging sculptures, or the series called Random Intersections. So we thought about showing the series of the random intersections in that room, because it's also the room that allows the scale for the sculptures to exist. And and I thought about like hanging everything from the center, where it's the highest point. I mean, everywhere is the highest point, but not everywhere is able to, not in all the area of the room is we're able to hang. So we just we will look at the ceiling and try to figure out where with the existing points where we could hang. And everywhere where we could do it, we would put another sculpture there. So again, there was no decisions of, oh, this sculpture stays better here than there. He was just trying to, we brought a series of sculptures there, and we were just trying to figure out where we could hang it. It was really a practical decision, but also I think it's the best when these things happen and we don't have to choose to have this kind of more how you say, more dubious way of installing work. And then I thought about like creating this. I mean, I thought if I use the central X of the room where the sculptures are hanging, I would have to still use the axis on the side, and thinking of it as another way of using screens, the same way as this kind of line exists with a rope inside of in the main gallery, in the homemaker and the main structures. Here we use kind of the same thing. So we passed rope throughout the beams, and we created these kind of screens, which I've used in another exhibition of mine. But I thought, like, why if I have another way of arranging these sculptures in this exhibition, I could also start looking at other things I've done, like using this kind of ropes as screens, which are also referring to a staircase of a house designed by Goldfinger in London. And I thought, like, why don't I rethink of using these methods of creating and modulating space the same way, I mean, in a different way, but using this kind of same sources, let's say.
Most striking memories I have of you, in some ways, you know, there was a kind of plan, but there's a lot of improvisation in the process of in a way making the work happen in that space, or in a way making the work visible. And as you were suspending a lot of the work, as you say, on only existing, you know, no hooks are added, even if there's that temptation from some of us to say, there would be just so great.
Exactly.
It's kind of, there are rules, and that is not possible. So it's this mixture of extreme materiality and a kind of haptic, very sensual sense. And, you know, like a conceptual procedure, there are rules that you set yourself almost to eliminate the kind of aesthetic choices that you'd associate with another kind of practice. So that was really amazing. You know, that's what it is to be in this process. But as you started with the ropes that you were threading through, making these screens, as you say, that you had done previously, drawing on the Goldfinger house on Willow Road. But there was a moment when Fiona was there as well. We were all kind of there as you were doing that. And what we were kind of experiencing was, as you put it, I think, you know, the room is being woven. You know, the space is not even a room, is it? You know, this space is being woven around us. So the architecture of the building is in the process of, you know, becoming a kind of vast loom.
I think a lot of the way, I would say the warehouse decided, didn't it? The warehouse was another part of the conversation. As you said, I had no idea that, I don't think any of us, our technical team had the idea that we wouldn't be putting hooks to hang the works in, we would be using the building in that way, and then we would be weaving the building in that way. There was something amazingly exciting when the building starts to join in, really, and the building has its opinion, and you have your opinion, and your work has its opinion, and the whole thing is moving in a very egalitarian kind of a way, which I don't think any of us were expecting. It was like the materiality of the space took over, really, and you clearly knew what was happening, but I don't think the rest of us did. But it was exciting, as you say, to see that the way that weaving can start to make a space have a say in an installation. It's really interesting.
I mean, one of the things that I think is really important about your work, for me, important about the work, is the way you use some of these designers and architects, often, you know, women protagonists that have been overlooked, almost as your material. So it's not as if the work is about those figures or about design and about architecture. I think there's a problem with that word "about." to
Yeah,
me.
it's about
You know,
nothing.
architecture is actually part of what you are working with, and not just in general, but specifically those beams, you know, and that empty space and that light aperture up there. And as you're working with it, it also has, it's obviously intensely spatial, but it also has a temporality about it. And as I kind of came rather late afternoon at a very different time of year, you know, than I'd been here before, the way in which the light is lower, the way the work is just incredibly susceptible to time and the passing of time and the weather conditions and the amount of light and how much the metal glimmers or doesn't glimmer, whether it disappears or kind of comes up in your field of vision. It's constantly mutable and mobile. So I think that aspect of the mobility of the work, which is partly about bringing together these points on a, you know, a diasporic modernist map, but also there is a kind of mobility to the physical thing, that the installations, and I think that's really what's most significant about it. As unusual as the method is, it's that sort of palpable physicality about it in a way that I think is what people have also responded to, I think, from what you've said.
I think they have really responded to the physicality of it, but this sense of movement and migration and displacement, which works all the way through it, from the designers and architects and artists who sit underneath some of it, who were mobile and who moved, to the materials that moved around. I mean, even the fact that you're coming in from Berlin, you move between Berlin and Portugal and here, and so did the materials. And there's again backwards and forwards between what's a metaphor and what's actually happening in the work. I think is really important, and movement and displacement are right at the heart of that. I mean, it's lovely just to hear you say very naturally, oh, there's woven wall, which came from Goldfinger's house in Willow Road. You know, everything is on the move all the way through it, which is very natural to you, but as becoming natural to us and our audiences, I think, to start asking the question all the time, where is this from? Where's it going? Where's it been? And where has this idea come from?
The other aspect of that, I suppose, is it's about movement, but it's also about scale. And you said earlier, you mentioned in passing your interest in a kind of domestic scale. And I think, however large the space of the warehouse is, there's something about the work, and that's especially clear, I guess, in the gallery upstairs, but all through your work, about, you know, a question really about what the measure is, or what kind of scale, what scale can be in relation to a body. Because obviously you're scaling up, you know, Goldfinger's latticing of the rope on his banister in Willow Road, but, you know, you're also creating environments that feel more domestic than many other artists, I would say. And you're even incorporating actual lamps, and you're often referring to furniture or taking tropes from Perrion's cushion from a chair, say. So, you know, that relationship between sculpture and furniture and that sense of a domestic scale. I wondered if you could say something about the way you approach making these environments, such as the one in the gallery upstairs.
For me, it's more interesting to think, like, even though the space can be monumental in terms of size, let's say, I think I tend to think of like bringing domesticity to the place rather than creating a domestic scale, is rather bringing the domesticity in it, like thinking as well as these objects could be just like any ordinary objects that exist in the world. And I mean, I'm interested, I think scale for me is, of course, very much related with classical, thinking about classical sculpture, the idea of like scaling up things from a module, which you can repeat by repetition, or you can just scale up. So I was always interested in the idea of what it means to exaggerate something. And if you exaggerate something, then you exaggerate it proportionally. So if I start to scale up cushions, I also have to scale up the stitching of the cushions, right? Because everything has to be proportional. I mean, at least in my understanding of making things. And so a lot of things I visit, in terms of if I do a specific research in terms of location. And I think the way I can experience the site is by measuring things that exist around me, and also thinking in terms of my own proportions regarding something that I'm looking at, in terms of like my body towards the scale of the things I'm looking at. And the way I can extrapolate things is by measuring them. So I try to, at the end, I have like lots of notebooks with lots of measures, and sometimes I'm just looking at numbers and then trying to figure out what I do with these measures. And sometimes I replicate them, sometimes I change them. There's always a process of transformation, but really thinking of what is this measuring things, what is the meaning of measuring, and what is the meaning of changing this measure, even if it's 10%, 20%, or scaling up to the double of the size. And like even thinking of like the pieces of the random intersections which exist in the warehouse, which is, again, for me, it has a lot to do with scale as well. Like I take a starting point, the idea of a bridle. For not all of them are bridles, but a lot of them are. And the first one I did, I scaled it up because I was interested in this idea of like the skeleton, or like the structure of the body that doesn't have volume to fill it in. And once you hang it, it loses its content, or it loses its content, but also it becomes this very fragile object that you don't really relate to, and that I can randomly intersect, and randomly, just by placing things around each other, they can, just due to gravity, they can formulate a new volume. But again, it's like these unities of measures that exist there, and each of them is like that. So there's like a composition of 10 or 12 or 18 pieces together. And while the room upstairs was very, I think it's a very different space. I mean, I really like the idea of the skylight, and the idea that you have to go up. And again, you don't know, you go left or you go right, and you have these two kind of corridors. One is narrower than the other. And so I thought of like doing a new series of works that actually exist on walls. I rarely use walls, I guess, or yeah, I mean, sometimes I do, but it's not really part of my kind of, I don't know if it's, I don't like to use the word vocabulary, but it's not really the way I could see my interfering in the use of space. But I thought like I could do a series of sculptures which are like standing on walls, but at the same time they are these kind of weird objects that actually relate to handrails, and to the idea of like using a stair, allowing you to go up the staircase or going down the staircase, but then they are again displaced, which I think they are very much displaced. And also the idea of like the rotation of this object, and what it means when you put an handrail, which has no use of a handrail, but then it has another function, which is to hold the sculpture that it's standing on it.
It's always interesting to me the way that you, as I didn't know this before, but during the discussions around the show, and as I was writing, Leonor was talking about some of the really earliest work that you'd done, Leonor, when you were shortly out of art school, where you'd made these handrail installations that were really just the handrail around the circumference of a room. It's always really interesting to me how not always, but quite often, an artist's work, the kind of possibilities are there. Really, this is from the early 90s, if I remember. We talk about it a little in the book, you know, that the possibility is kind of there from the very beginning, and then that idea of the handrail kind of takes a grip in some way, and you can see it so strongly being played out in so much of the work. And it is, you know, it's not a staircase, it's the handrail, so it's something subsidiary to something that's already quite sort of overlooked and potentially subsidiary in the structure of a house, you know, and that sense of a detail as opposed to an architectural element. You know, there's something about the detail, whether it's joints or hinges or, you know, the handrails that you have looking so different in the gallery upstairs. But I think that kind of looking askance at, or looking obliquely at something that is almost invisible or falls beneath the threshold of visibility, which you then exaggerate. I love that idea of kind of exaggeration. It becomes almost a point of fixation and then lives another kind of life. And the handrails upstairs that are drawn from Sophie Teuber's handrails, but there's so many kind of indirect connections. There's kind of degrees of separation there that are really interesting, I think.
They also introduce the way you go in, no? The way you approach space and the way you go through space. And this kind of use of the hand to go through. I guess in the beginning I was very interested in like thinking of the audience entering spaces and how to guide them through rooms. So I did a series of handrails, which I would displace out of sites, or I would replicate handrails that people would not normally have access to. So there was always a sense of dislocation, but also of accessibility to something that you wouldn't normally be able to do. But it was actually quite literal in that way. It was very physical as an object. You could really, and in that way, I was again interested in this idea of domesticity, in bringing an object that everybody knows what it is. But then sometimes I would transform the material, I would change the materials, or I would just replicate something that exists upstairs from downstairs. Or I remember once I did this project in Lisbon, and the other day I was looking at it because I was showing it to my daughter, and I looked at this slide, and it's a project that I've done in the city. I was very young, and I was invited to do this, participate in this festival. I think it was a festival where a lot of artists were invited to do work in a specific neighborhood, which is a very kind of idiosyncratic part of the city. It's very poor, extremely poor, but at the same time kind of very aristocratic. And Lisbon has this thing. And there's this staircase which basically was constructed to give access to a train line which never existed. And they did this really long handrail, and then at some point the handrail just broke in two parts, like there was a missing part, because I don't know what happened there. So I decided to just do the missing part of the handrail and place it on the other side of the wall of this staircase. And it stood there for forever. I don't know, every time I would come to the city, like every year I would pass by and this thing was still there. And the other day I went and it was missing. So I guess someone took it, and well, I don't know what happened, but for me it was quite a metaphor.
It's quite nice to have a missing staircase, a replica of a missing staircase go missing. There's something very nice of the missing handrail. It's lovely.
Yes, how many lost objects
Exactly.
can you kind of pile up
Yeah.
in one?
It
We should
shows somewhere
probably Maybe it's being reinstated in somebody's house has come back to the body somewhere. Would be a nice thought. We should probably move to questions.
I think so, yes.
From the audience, if there are
absolutely.
questions in the room or if there are questions online. I'm going to give you a little bit of time. I'm raising my eyebrows at Ian. There's a I'll go to Ian online first, and then there's one in the room.
Okay,
Ian,
there's two questions that have come through online. One of them is, it seems that the forms in Leonor's work are bringing visual languages or materials of artists and designers of the past into a new conversation with each other. Could Leonor say anything about what is happening for her when these visual languages are brought by her into a single space or conversation through her work?
Thank you. What does it mean for me? Well, I think I'm interested in the idea as an artist working today. I'm interested in, and I think all artists in a way are in the history, what other artists did, but not only artists. I think I'm interested in many different things, and sometimes I think, like, how can I combine all my interests? Because it's not about me being interested in something in particular. I'm curious, so I look at very different things, and I'm very interested in crafts, in specific ways of doing, but also in the idea of like not losing certain skills of making things. Like for me, for example, the way I look at things, it also enables me to work within certain people, which I think are very precious. And I don't do physically all my work. Sometimes I do it myself. Sometimes I have assistants helping me, or sometimes I want to work with a specific workshop because it has been a very important workshop without the history of design, or thinking about like saddle making, like in Portugal. Like most of the works that I produce in leather are made there by this man who has a very small workshop, and it enables him to continue doing his work because it's very difficult for him to survive as a saddle maker. And I think, like as all skills and all apprenticeships, it requires a lot of time and a lot of dedication, and it's a life to do something or to learn about doing something specific. And working in leather it requires as much attention as working with wood, for example, and allowing these people to continue what they do. It also, I'm interested in that the métier doesn't end, or allows me to help them to survive and still doing the work they do.
That's lovely. The microphone's on the move. So there's a question in the room, and I think Ian has another one online.
Thank you very much indeed. This is an absolutely fascinating conversation. I'm afraid my question is very simple. I've been to Lisbon a few times, and I just really like to know which area of Lisbon the missing handrail, or the recreated missing handrail that then went missing. I'd really like to know where that was, because I'd like to go there.
The saddle maker?
No, the handrail, the missing staircase, the handrail from the staircase.
So this is a very beautiful area called Marvila. It's on the water, near the river. And it's, how can I explain? It's a very poor neighborhood. It's close to Beato and this part of the city. It's close to the area where they had this exhibition, the World War Fair in '98. So they built this new, as it happens with all the cities, I think, when a country is selected or a city is selected to have the World Exhibition Fair, they do a completely new setting and a new neighborhood to allocate all these pavilions, etc. And Lisbon has that as well. So it's very close to that area. And but to go there exactly to the staircase, I would have to send you a map, because it's not very easy to find. And that's what I was interested in going there, because I know the area quite well. So I was interested in exploring an area of this neighborhood which is really remote.
It's so funny hearing you talk about handrails and staircases. I was in Lisbon when we were putting the final touches to the design of the extension of the Fruitmarket, and I photographed so many handrails and staircases
Interesting.
to keep showing them to architects, saying, "Can we have can we have one like this? No. Can we have one like this? No." So we ended up with a handrail that I love very much, but it was became obsessed with Lisbon staircases and handrails. Are there more questions on? Yeah, Ian has another one.
So
from
the other
online.
question that's come through is, do you draw these works, Leonor, before making, or do you draw through the making and arranging of the sculptures?
Yeah, it's a nice question. Thank you. It depends. Sometimes I do sketches, but I don't really like to do sketches. I do a lot of measuring, that's what I said. And then I put these measures in notebooks, and then I start drawing from these measures. But it's more like kind of very technical drawings. So I do a lot of technical drawings, and I work, let's say, very flat first, like in a bidimensional surface, which is the screen of my computer sometimes. And but I take a lot of notes and written notes and measures, and sometimes I draw things after I've done them. That's true, but it really depends. Each sculpture is a different case.
I love that idea of drawing a sculpture afterwards. I think you both know I'm obsessed with the afterlife of artworks, how they learn once they're installed, what happens to them next, or how they change within the idea that you would draw that and document that or think again about something through drawing it again is really, really lovely. I like that a lot. Are there any more questions, or will...
And also the idea of caring, no? The idea of caring,
Yes.
taking care of the work. That is, I'm also very interested in that. And the idea of using leather, which is a skin, or cork, which is another skin, which are materials that you need to take care of them. Otherwise, they don't really last. And I tend to think that you have to take care of the work. Otherwise, it just doesn't survive, or it doesn't look good in the future. So one needs to make it last and to take care of it.
Obviously, it's music to the ears of those of us here and in the audience who are curators. That's what we're for, is to take care of things. And clearly, artists, I think, well, one of I think the best things about artists is they take care of the world for us, and they bring things to light for us that we might not necessarily notice otherwise. And certainly, your work does that. And your work, Briony, also taking care of Leonor's way of taking care in this very beautiful book. I think we've all learnt so much, and it's a little space. I think that's all we can do, isn't it? Is just to make some space, to hold some ideas together and think things through together. It was such a privilege, really, for us to sit in this space. And really, I can't thank you enough for battling through COVID and coming. It's so strange. We all learnt that in the pandemic, how strange it is to not be in the room. And I remember vividly these evenings when things would happen, as the alchemy of being together always happens. And then I'm aware that we are all here in the room to look at the book again and to have a glass of wine and to be together, and you'll be in Berlin without us. And I thank you so much, Leonor, and thank you to the family for letting you take this time. But it's really, thank you for your beautiful show. Thank you both for this extraordinary book. Thank you all for coming this evening. But most of all, Leonor, thank you, even when you're ill. Thank you for taking the time and the care to come and spend time with us. Thank you.
Always.